Okay, so the final question is going to be an exercise. So again, another exercise with firm F trade and exit. Here we're going to consider the firms are going to be heterogeneous. And we're going to consider what happens when we open up to trade, which firms are going to choose to enter, which firms are going to choose to exit, and so we're going to do all of that in a graphical sense. And so again, we're going to consider the assumption that firms are going to differ in their marginal cost. That's how they're going to be heterogeneous. Each firm is going to share the same demand, and so demand looks exactly the same as before. And so the price that each firm is going to charge is going to be given by some term that's the intercept, and so that's equal to 1 over NB plus P bar. So note that that doesn't depend on Q. So if we plot Q along the x-axis and price along the y-axis, that will be the intercept. And then the slope is just going to be -1 over SB. And so we can depict on a graph what's going to happen to firms' demand when the economy is going to open to trade. Okay, so what I've done is I've just written down price as a function of quantity. So this is the inverse demand function that we have from our standard demand in all of these problems. And so again, just to recap, we have a y-intercept and we have a slope. So if I just wanted to draw out demand, inverse demand for a given firm's product, what it would be, or their brand, what it would be is that this here, so if Q is 0, then this would just be the y-intercept. And so what this is I can just draw that this is P bar over N plus B. And then, you know, if we just want to think about what the slope is, or what the sort of rise over run is here, well, this could be just 1, and then this would be 1 over SB. So how steep it is going to depend on 1 over SB. And so again, this is P of Q. Since this is linear demand, you can see that that demand is totally linear in quantity. Then our marginal revenue, of course, will just be half the slope of the price, but that's not really the big thing that I want to point out here. Okay, so the question is, how does demand change when we open to trade? And so to answer this, I'm just going to go back to some of the results that we saw earlier. So in the first problem, we saw that what happens when we open up to trade is basically that if we have S for, say, home, then and then we have, you know, another country, we're going to have that our market size is going to grow from what SH, what it was initially, to some S that we now have in trade. Okay. And so, so the market size is because we now have removed all barriers to firms sort of trading across country borders. Now the market size is effectively larger. Likewise, if we have some number of firms in home initially, then we also have that just from home's perspective, the number of firms that are now out there is going to be greater as well. Okay, so those are the two results that we saw in just earlier parts of this section. So so those two results are going to imply a couple of changes in S and B, which are going to imply changes in how demand is going to look. So for instance, one thing that's going to happen is that S is going to increase. That's what this is saying here. And then the other thing is that N is also going to increase. So note, N only appears in the y-intercept. So the first thing that's going to happen is that I'm going to have my y-intercept now go down to, say, p-bar 1 over nt. I don't know if you can see that on the video, but it's just sort of a higher number of firms. So if this was n h initially, again, I don't know if you can see this. Now the y-intercept falls to that level. Okay, and then the next thing that we've had is we have that s increases. And so if s increases, then you can note that the slope is going to become shallower. It's going to become a little bit flatter. And so as s increases, then this is going to get smaller. And so essentially what we're now going to have is that we're now going to have that inverse demand is now going to start from a lower y-intercept, and it's going to have a shallower slope. So essentially it's going to look something like this. And so where I need to make this axis a little longer. Okay, and so now this is our new demand for the monopolistic competitor's product. Again, it doesn't. This isn't really part of the question, but since again this is linear demand, we have that marginal revenue here for the firm is just going to be equal to half of its inverse demand. Okay, so those are the two factors that are going to influence this graph of demand for the monopolistic competitor's product. Since we have that the market size has increased and the number of firms has increased, we have that the y-intercept goes down and the slope becomes shallower. Okay, and so this is just the same graph of what we're saying, just a little bit, maybe a little bit nicer to read than my sort of sloppy handwriting. Okay, and so in question 2, we're going to assume that firms observe identical demand curves for their varieties, but are characterized by different productivities. Where different productivities means that they're going to have different marginal costs. And so we're going to try to depict 3 firms, one of which will expand after the trade openness, one of which will shrink, and one of which will exit. And then from this perspective, we want to ask, what firm of those 3 is going to benefit the most from trade? So I've returned to this diagram that I drew on the board. I've erased some of the notation to make things a little bit easier to follow. But again, at first we had P of Q, so this line right here. And then when we open up to trade, we have a flatter market demand, inverse market demand for all firms' products, which has a lower y-intercept and then a shallower slope. And then here, if you can see the dashed lines are both marginal revenue functions for basically our initial autarky case and then our case of trade. And so what we want to do is we want to draw 3 firms, some of which are going to exit, some of which are going to expand, and the other of which is just going to shrink. So let's draw a case of a firm that now it will exit when it opens the trade. So suppose that this is my marginal cost of firm 1. Marginal cost is just fixed. It's just a number, and so it doesn't matter how much we produce. Our marginal cost is fixed. And so initially, with sort of the higher, steeper inverse market demand that we have in autarky, we're going to set, we're going to produce a quantity that intersects marginal revenue with our marginal cost, and so that's going to be a quantity Q1. And then we're going to sell at a price. P1. Okay. But now notice that with our new lower marginal revenue curve, there's nowhere that that marginal cost is going to potentially intersect marginal revenue. And so here you can note that this firm will exit when it opens the trade. Okay, so now what we want to do is we want to depict a firm that's going to shrink when it opens to trade as well. And so let's do this by having firm 2 have a marginal cost right here. So note this firm again is going to produce a quantity at a quantity that's given by the intersection of its marginal cost and marginal revenue initially, which I claim is right here. So it's going to produce Q2 initially. And then what it's going to do is it's going to sell at a price given by the intersection of quantity, or sort of vertical quantity line and price. That happens to be the same as marginal cost there, but it need not be. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to, well, I can leave that up, but it's going to sell at a price P2. And again, it just happens to be that P2 is the same as MC1, but there's no economic reason why that's true. It's just I'm bad at drawing graphs. Okay, and so now we want to ask what's going to be the new amount of production that firm 2 is going to produce. And so again, we're just going to look at its intersection of marginal cost with the new marginal revenue line. And what that's going to be now is it's going to be this reduced Q2 new. Again, it's going to sell at a price which is given by the price that the market will bear at a production of Q2. So now its price that it sells at going to be P2 new. And notice that the price that it's selling at and the quantity that it's producing are less. And so since both price and quantity that it's producing at have decreased, then it's clear that firm 2 will shrink. Okay, so now I'm going to draw a third firm, which we're going to hope is going to expand. So suppose that a third firm comes along and has a much lower marginal cost. Let's call this firm 3. So MC3 refers to firm 3's marginal cost of production. So initially, it's going to produce a quantity given by its intersection of marginal cost with initial marginal revenue, and then it will charge a price given by what the market can bear. So here, it will charge a price of P3, and I'm just going to erase P2s here. So it's going to charge initially a price of P3. Okay, and so now, when we have trade integration and the inverse market demand has a lower y-intercept and also gets shallower, now my firm is going to produce, again, where new marginal revenue intersects old marginal cost. And so that's going to be given by there. So this is Q3 new. And so note that my firm is going to produce relatively more now. So Q3 is going to increase. And again, it's going to produce, it's going to sell at a cost given by what the new market will bear, which is P3 new. And so notice two things. One, we can say that firm 3 will expand. And the reason I'm saying that it's expanding is that it's producing more quantity. So Q3 has increased. But notice this is good for consumers because the price that it's selling at now is actually less than before. So it's now selling those units at a price of P3. And so we have that this efficient firm will expand more when we integrate to trade, and the sort of competitive forces that market integration gives us is also going to give us that the most efficient firm is going to sell at a lower price. So we have that firms that are inefficient, they're going to exit or shrink, depending on how inefficient they are. And efficient firms will be able to expand, and due to increased competition and the fact that we have more efficient firms producing, those two factors are going to drive down costs for consumers. And so, or prices for consumers are going to fall. And so this is given by this graph here. And so this is just saying exactly what I did, but on the board, but perhaps in sort of a little bit easier to read format. So in case this is useful. So that's all I have. I hope that this has been helpful. I'll have office hours tomorrow on Tuesday. So from 1:30 to 3:30. Sorry about the change. And I'll also have time to sort of answer any questions you have about this section, or sort of have an opportunity to go over the material again on Wednesday during regular section time. So thank you so much. Hope everybody is well, and I'll see you next time with the section. Thanks.